Wyeth Thomas is a graduate student studying creative writing at BYU. He's recently won the Mayhew Contest in Poetry and the Ann Doty Fiction Award. Today, he's with us as a poet. Years ago, Lance Larson asked me what kind of poems I reach for on the shelf at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep, when the day's weight still lingers and I'm left longing for solace. Wyeth's poems are the ones I'd reach for. His poems are gentle, strong, restrained, and most importantly, they reverence the great wrestle that is life. In reading Wyeth's poems, we are left both reassured and wondering. Wyeth's love and understanding of the visual arts bring to his poems a painterliness, a rich texture and color and movement that leave us simply saying aloud, "How beautiful." These poems tread gently into the world, asking great questions of it. Like Wyeth, his poems are without pretense or guile. All writers employ artifice, but Wyeth's ease with the English language, his love of words and sound offer his readers entrance into a world of both belonging and expansion. Who else but Wyeth would write a line like, "Meanwhile the moon looms in cahoots, sad as bone"? Wyeth's voice of temperance in workshop, his respect for the tradition of the craft, and his ability to find hilarity in all the small corners of the world make him a beloved peer and colleague to all of us learning beside him. It's my pleasure to introduce Wyeth to you today.
Good morning. I'm going to start off with a few ekphrastic poems. Ekphrastic poetry is a tradition that addresses or narrates or reflects on the action of a painting or sculpture or any of the other fine arts. And the hope for an ekphrastic poem is that it expands or amplifies the content of the piece of art that it addresses. This first poem is in the voice of Alexander Calder, who was a 20th century sculptor, and you might remember him as the originator of the mobile, the hanging mobile. His poem's Alexander Calder to I. M. Pei on the installation of Untitled in the East Building of the National Gallery of Art, 1976. I am not at all concerned to hear that the red tail will just clear the west wall. Personally, I might be in favor of a little grazing, rubbing. The magic of matter is collision and collusion. I wait, bewitched, for the sun to hiss into the sea, or to light on a mountain and roll like a red ball into a rift somewhere, lost. Meanwhile, the moon looms in cahoots, sad as bone, because always, yet as if by chance, the sun seems to miss the earth by mere inches. This poem is called Ocean Park Number 79, after Richard Diebenkorn's painting of the same title. Diebenkorn was an abstract expressionist from the Bay Area. There is something down by the water, gradually unfolding, pulling sideways, back and forth, something like a diagram inching towards chaos. It works thinly in the breathing light, turning the gridded streets on their hinges, everything bent toward a secret geometry. The sea, the sky, a patch of weeds, this hillside, all scumble and pentimento. Must a line etched into the skin of things be scraped away before it can carry an idea fully? This poem is called Casa Azul, which is the home of Frida Kahlo, in which my wife Haley and I were able to visit last summer in Mexico City, and I began the piece while I was there. Casa Azul. In Coyoacan, a woman lies dying. Pills, paints, and a book of American poems lie on a pine nightstand beside a bouquet of brushes. Still life in bloom. Some days she listens for yawning in her womb. Other days she listens to her broken heart chuff like footfalls approaching in snow. Today she says, "I'm a poor little deer," and paints herself pierced with arrows. In 60 years, the woman's self-portrait hangs beside the bed where a docent pretends not to notice it. When nobody is looking, he touches the canvas tenderly. He's learned by heart the marginal notes in the book of poems on the nightstand. He smells the bouquet of brushes before he turns off the lights and goes home. At home, his wife is in bed. And tonight he'll dream he's a statue at a touch gallery. He'll dream of nimble fingers at his marble throat. And he'll wake from the dream and wonder if any language on earth has a word for the sadness of solitary sleep. This poem is called Leaving Naxos, Ringed with Waves. Naxos is one of the Cycladic islands in Greece. And this poem is after Cy Twombly's painting called Say Goodbye, Catullus, to the Shores of Asia Minor. I love Twombly's, and I chose this painting, and I love Twombly's work because he is doing what I'm trying to do, but the reverse. So he would start with poems, and then he would paint based on those poems, which I thought was really cool. The poets that he was influenced by, some of them were Rilke and Dickinson, and in this case, Catullus. Leaving Naxos, ringed with waves. Waiting for the boat to beetle us west. The quiet cypress says, quick, fasten the charms of today with nails or twine, or lines, but make each line the rasp and caress of its own realization. Anything unfixed will blow into the sea, will sink into untidy furrows. Whitewash the chapel and bundle the sheep. Yellow the basket of beheaded sunflower. Hang ropes of garlic, constellations strung. Hang drying octopi, sad chandeliers. Button together sea and sky and rinse both in improbable blue. Quick, fasten the dusk water, honeyed and slapping against the boat beating you home. Forget it, says the moon, the wobbly old moon. The day's been untwinned from its images. Return if you like. The patina will be different. These next two poems are my Oregon Coast poems, and I can't explain it, but the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Oregon Coast, creeps into my imagination all the time. And again, I can't really explain it. This poem's called Elegy Apology. Out here where houses meet the sea in rusty decrescendo, where thickets of wild blackberry warn against encroachment, where the wind steals plastic kites, where sea lions mock our shows of abundance, and stands of fog-washed fur nod in cold agreement from eroding cliffs, we in black wetsuits watch the ashen light creep across the deep in aluminum waves and sketch symbols in the palimpsestic sand, forms to bear a continent of grief. Over and over we scratch at the wet sand. Over and over sleeves of foam rush in to erase our work, anxious we get it right. This poem is called The View from Cape Disappointment. And Cape Disappointment is where Lewis and Clark finally encountered the Pacific Ocean, and it's right at the mouth of the Columbia River there. Does the ocean make dreaming of rivers seem puny? Was Sacagawea disappointed by how quickly Lewis emptied the sand from his boots and returned to his plants, Gaultheria Shallon and its laxative properties, and Clark his maps, his wavering attention to verisimilitude, his adorable triangle mountains? I'll bet she poked around a little in the tide pools, teaching her son the scuff and muckle alphabet of starfish. I'll bet she unhusked him from his smoky papoose and dipped him in the dark water. I'll bet she stroked the quicksilver belly of a star steelhead and said, "This is what your cells look like under a microscope." I'll bet she teetered along pickup stick piles of driftwood and returned to camp at dusk end, reluctant to join the tinny chorus of fiddle, tambourine, and horn. I'm working right now on a series of poems, or series of Stations of the Cross poems. So these don't have titles, but this is Stations of the Cross, number 12. In the winter garden I called you by your secret names: Hunger Immaculate, Starched and Pressed, Glitter King, Pasture Fire. And you answered in a voice I could not place, a bare tree heavy with winter robins. I listened for canticles behind the ruffle of wings. I waited for a thickening in the salt-sharp air, for the garden to hum, for restless limbs to break bud early. I waited. But the red-bellied birds munched dumbly on bitterberry, like a high-wire performance of pity, grief. And when they took off, they did so quietly, so much tenderness caught in the throat, choke cherry, choke cherry, choke cherry. This poem is Stations of the Cross, number 3. And the Lord said, one night, many, many years ago, my father and I talked late into the evening of pocket knives and space dust and fish without eyes, of gametes and zygotes and licorice jelly beans, of whales and Sherpas and shape-shifting Indians, of baby teeth, of sadness, of sainthood. My father looked at his watch. I shifted in my sleeping bag. We talked of geese and their illimitable chase, of angels and their appetite for zeros, of the eternal unwinding of light. And this is a prose poem that I recently completed called When the Great Flood Came. We knew it was bad when our pets paired and headed east. For 3 days and 3 nights it rained, but nobody considered praying for an end. It seemed the rain would never lose its appetite for earth. And so the river swelled like sprains and mocked the conventional wisdom of sandbags. For a time, it was chimney, 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 tree, then goodbye chimneys, goodbye trees, then just the white tips of mountains. I had a hell of a time rowing around up there in the shell of a bass cello, drifting by mice in a cereal box, a lonely barber on a raft of the town's bundled hair, my art teacher, Miss Biggs, swirling in an eddy on her back, breasts like happy white buoys. There was a lazy camaraderie among survivors, like you see between motorcyclists who raise 2 fingers as they pass. Eventually, I came to the place where all currents converged. Trapped in the swirling gyre was a vast island of debris, and from the debris, a great floating city was being built. When I arrived, there was a city hall and a grand canal, a university, a bazaar, a zoo, a bathhouse. I built my house, a lovely log cabin on a flotilla of rain barrels, right along the Grand Canal. 2 weeks later, I was on 81st in Amsterdam. 2 weeks after that, Rue de Rivoli. Such is the nature of drifting cities. Over and over, I fell in love with the girl next door, which in a drifting city is around 26 girls a year. All the girls had firm handshakes and the whitest teeth. My first year in the city, I was a bespectacled greengrocer. The next year, I was a pop icon kitted out in leather. The year after that, I was the stern but fair admiral of our city's naval fleet. All day long, I went around declaring this or that in tip-top shape. The city didn't have a name, or rather, it was whatever anyone decided to call it. And we were all surprised to find one day a small hump of dry land in the center of our city. The flood waters were subsiding. Pretty soon, our city was no longer a drifting city, but a valley city. Life in a valley is very different from life on water. Many people packed up and moved out. New people moved in. The city is now much like any other city. We have a metro and a financial district and strict building codes. Our city now even has a name. And I now have a wife and adult children and a house made of bricks. Walking the city on nights growing shorter, I sometimes think I hear a knot of men mending fish nets or smell seared meat drifting from one of the dimly lit food stalls of the old bazaar. But I know that these are just the tricks of old age, for when I pause at my gate to watch the lights of the new city wink on one by one, I no longer sense green dreams circling below my feet like sea monsters. Thank you.
Tessia Tsai is an MFA candidate studying fiction here at BYU. Her work has been published in Inscape and the Four Seasons anthology by Kind of a Hurricane Press. She hopes to one day publish novels for children and young adults. Her passion for storytelling came from her mother, who would, before bed, tell her Chinese folk tales or made-up stories. Tessia began to weave her own narratives with lifelike characters and plots. They became a way to create and share an experience with her readers. Connect with them through the magic of the page. I first had a class with Tessia last semester, and reading her fiction felt like slipping into the skin of a teenager, complete with young passions and worries that ran to the bone and back. I have no doubt Tessia will go on to write worlds that will capture readers, both young and old, and share with them an experience where one might even say, I now feel less alone. And now, Tessia Tsai.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm reading for you today is a novel that I'm currently working on. And this is a young adult novel in which I wanted to explore the effects of child sexual abuse. Um, and so, yeah, through my character, I tried to just explore the different ways that she tries to heal from that. So I'm just going to read the first, so just the beginning. And I've broken this novel not into chapters, but into unnumbered sections. But for the sake of clarity, when I'm reading today, I will just number the sections. So it's titled The Mad and the Lost. Section 1. I hated my birthday. It always fell the week before school started, late August, and it felt like any celebration was a fraud. A sorry your summer's over and you have to go back to Suckville event. When I was 12, I told my mom not to bother anymore. From then on, there was no party, no friends, no pointed paper hats, and candy stuffed vapor bags. Mom still insisted on celebrating, though on a much smaller scale, because what kind of family doesn't celebrate its children's birthdays, she said. She would make my favorite foods for dinner, buy me a mint chocolate chip ice cream cake from Baskin Robbins. Is it working? Okay, good, thanks. After blowing out the candle, I'd open presents, one from Mom, one from Dad, one from my older brother, Nick. My mother sang, "Happy birthday, sweetie." I would smile, fold up the wrapping, scrape the last bits of ice cream crumbs from my plate. And then it was over. Hurrah, until next year. My 16th birthday was a little different. My mom bought special candles, the kind that sprayed like sparklers. The presents were nicer too. From Nick, wireless headphones. From Mom, a generous gift card for new clothes. From Dad, a special edition of my childhood favorite, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, which included both tales. My father winked and squeezed my knee under the table, his hand lingering. "I know yours was falling apart," he said. "Happy birthday, my special girl." It was a beautiful book with deco-edged pages and cloth-bound binding that coughed when you tapped it. The indigo cover was etched with golden borders, text, and flowers. It was a book that begged to be touched, to be stroked and held, to be cracked open, to breathe. It was the loveliest gift my father had ever given me. But my mind was on other things. Catching my mother's eyes across the table, I smiled and said, "So, I worked all summer as promised, and I've saved up a couple $100. Does that mean I can finally get a car?" My dad spoke before she could. "What's this?" "We talked about it," Mom said. "About Jenna getting a car for her birthday if she proved she could be responsible." "I am," I said. "I even keep working on the weekends so you don't have to worry about gas." My dad ignored me, still addressing my mother. I said I would think about it. "Oh, what's the big deal, Mark? We got Nick a car when he turned 16. I figured we would do the same for her. It'll only be a used car anyway, and with your recent promotion, it shouldn't be a problem." "No, that's not the problem," Dad said. "The problem is she's too young to be driving." I should have stayed silent then, been a good girl, and dropped it. But after spending all summer working, expecting something for my efforts, I just couldn't let it go. "But Dad," I said, "I'm getting my license next week. I passed the test and everything." "It doesn't matter," he said. "Where do you need to go anyway? Your brother can drive you to school." I stared at my mom. She glanced at my dad and shook her head at me. "Not now," her eyes said. I looked to Nick, but he was absorbed in something on his phone. I didn't know what I had expected. He never stepped in when I bickered with our parents. I wasn't done pushing, though. "You promised," I told my mother. "I worked all summer and that's enough." The air hardened into glass. He hadn't shouted, hadn't slammed his hands on the table, but the words hit like a bullet. I shrank into my seat, lips tight. A beat of silence, his voice low. "You won't bring this up again, understand?" I nodded. Then, "Yes, I understand." Section 2. My alarm clock said it was 12:31 a.m. Mom was already sound asleep in bed. Earlier, she'd offered an unhelpful sorry when we passed each other by the bathroom. Nick was out at a friend's house, either playing games or shooting hoops. Dad had said he would be working in his office downstairs. My brain was still charged from dinner, my thoughts flicking frenziedly around, back and forth. I rolled onto my side and heard it. His foot hit the squeaky step, then thumped the rest of the way up. I listened to him shuffle down the hallway, his footsteps, 1, 2, 1, 2. I unraveled in my bed, my brain peeling away from my body with his every step. He reached my door and stopped. Hidden in the four walls of my room, he sat down beside me and placed his hand on top of my blanket over my hip. I needed to turn and face him, but I couldn't. His voice was soft. "Didn't you like my present?" I thought of my new book. At that moment, it sat on my lower shelf, leaning against my former copy of Alice in Wonderland. "Yes," I said quietly. The silence expanded between us. In it, we both heard the but I couldn't say. Yes, but it doesn't matter. Yes, but it's not what I wanted. Yes, but you didn't give me a chance. He caught the word in the air, gave it a form, and said, "But it's not enough." I remained mute. I itched to curl further into my knees, yet I was sure something would fracture if I moved. "Do you remember what you promised me when you were younger?" His palm moved up and down my side. "You promised you would never grow up, that you would stay my special little girl." I swallowed. My throat remained dry. He asked, "Are you going to break your promise?" After a long hesitation, I finally whispered, "No," because I was supposed to, because his question was not a question. His hand was under the sheets, on my thigh, but I could hardly feel it. With my eyes closed, I imagined I was somewhere else, floating in nowhere. So long as my mind wasn't there, in my room, I couldn't feel him explore me like a garden, couldn't feel him pluck a dripping red rose from each bush as he went along, discovering all my secret corners. As usual, I counted my breaths to keep myself breathing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Section 3. The house was quiet with my dad at work, my mom at the nursing home, Nick at the park playing basketball with his friends. I made myself a sandwich and put away the clean dishes. Standing by the sink, I observed the front yard through the panes of a window trimmed with lemon curtains. Maybe it was the curtains, maybe it was the season, but everything felt lemony. The grass, the maple tree, the swing rocking from a branch, wood plank rotting from rain and neglect. To the right, a pair of little girls pedaled down the sidewalk on their bright Barbie pink bikes. It all seemed fake, like a plastic neighborhood, plastic town. I almost expected a giant to come stomping on our picturesque roofs. Don't get me wrong, I love my hometown. I loved its name, for one, the ebb and flow of the words Willow Hill on my tongue. It was quaint, pastoral, and old-fashioned in an endearing sort of way. I loved the brick buildings of the village, the shops like accordions, tall and short, squat and thin. I loved the college on the hill, its windows glowing down at night, as if it were the castle to our kingdom. But it wasn't a kingdom. It couldn't even be called a city. Sometimes for me, it didn't feel like a town, but a house, my house, with walls like barricades. I waited for the girls to pass by, the sound of their laughter disappearing with them. Then I grabbed a bag of chocolate chips and went upstairs, where I scrolled through my social media feed until my vision blurred. I pushed my new headphones off my head onto my shoulders, slid down the bed to the floor, stretched out my legs, and considered the book sitting on the lower shelf, directly beneath the ceramic cat, a gift from my friend Rena, on the shelf above. Alice in Wonderland. My mom had bought me my first copy at a yard sale for $2, but it was my father who read the tales to me as a kid. He brought the characters to life with the way he changed his voices and the way he hopped around the room, mimicking the harried white rabbit. He even sang the songs out loud, making up his own melody as he went, an attempt that often fell into flat notes. But I didn't care. They sounded just right to me. I pulled the book into my lap and stared at the unopened cover, trying not to think about my father. "Come on," the white rabbit called. "Come find me." "Friend," said the Cheshire Cat. "Wonderland." I opened the book and read. Section 4. It was almost 5 when I decided to take a break, not because I was tired of the stories, but because I couldn't stop feeling my father's shadow hovering behind my shoulder. I needed to get out. I needed to stop thinking. I shut the book and left for the one place where I could always find a distraction. Rena lived 2 streets down from mine, past a shortcut through the Johnsons' yard, the sidewalk corner with the contorted street sign, "Struck by lightning," said the kids, the house with the broken cars crowding the driveway. Reaching Rena's place, I slipped through the fence into the Clark's backyard, climbed up the tree outside Rena's room, and tapped on her window. I could have knocked on the front door, but I'd been taking the burglar route since Rena and I were 10. Her mother, Donna, had long gotten used to my appearing suddenly in her house. Sometimes I wondered she would one day mistake an actual burglar for me, but the habit stuck. Rena was sprawled on her sheets, staring at her laptop when I arrived. At my knock, she looked up and saw me crouching there like a crow. She leaped off her bed and came to unlock the window. "If it isn't my favorite lurker," she greeted. Rena always reminded me of a wild pixie. It wasn't just the short black hair and the kaleidoscope clothes or the combat boots. It was her bravery, her boldness in staring something reckless in the eye and punching it in the face. I often joked that she got her craziness from her Italian side, but I knew it was more than that. It was all Rena. "What's wrong?" she said as I wiggled inside. I gave her the usual answer, nothing. She cocked her head and gave her usual response. "All right, then what shall we do to distract you from this nothing?" I folded myself into the nest she'd made on her bed and glanced at her laptop screen. "We can finish this episode of Firefly," I said, "and maybe eat some mint chocolate ice cream if you have some." She sank into the bed beside me. "We always have some. You know we only restock it for you." She was only partly joking. Rena liked ice cream as much as the next person, but I knew where most of the tub went, and it wasn't in the stomach of a Clark. My mother didn't believe in keeping a store of junk food in the house, arguing that the best way to resist temptation was to avoid it. Unknown to her, I happily did the opposite outside of home. "I love you," I told Rena, giving her the look of a gratified 5-year-old. She stared at my unmoving body and sighed. For a second, a flicker of concern crossed her face. I tensed. But then she rolled her eyes and tumbled toward the door. "Fine," she said, "I'll go get it. But don't you dare hit play while I'm gone." "Even though you've already seen this a billion times?" Her brows shot up in warning. Though she was small, it wasn't hard for Rena to look tough, even when she didn't mean it. "All right," I laughed. "I promise I won't." I could hear her stomping noisily down the stairs, prompting a complaint from Donna in the study. Smoothing my palms out on Rena's sheets, I couldn't help thinking about another bed in another room, about a voice that could be cold and warm at the same time. "Stop it," my brain chided. "Think of something else." There wasn't much else to think of, so I broke my promise and pressed play on Rena's laptop. And when I heard her footsteps on the stairs, I quickly rewound the video to the exact place she'd left it. Thank you.
I've had the privilege of knowing Sarah Jane for the past few years. We've been in classes and writing groups together, and at our first writing conference, she even gave me a pep talk before approaching one of our favorite authors, Brian Doyle. I've been inspired by her writing and her friendship, so I'm very happy to introduce her to you. Sarah Jane Myers is from St. George, Utah. As a child, she was an avid reader and loved The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. She graduated with a bachelor's in English from BYU and is receiving her master's in creative writing this spring. She has been published in Young Raven's Literary Review and Inscape. I always thought Sarah Jane was born writing this genre, and when she told me that she won a contest in kindergarten for a nonfiction essay, my suspicions were confirmed. She currently lives in Provo with her husband and a new baby girl. Her personal essays are vulnerable, poetic, and poignantly imaginative. Sarah Jane is one of the few of us who is not tempted to see or write in cliché. I've always known her to have a unique and often mind-blowing perspective. She has kept the childlike wonder and awe alive that most of us have lost. Her essays are imaginative, like Amy Leach. She doesn't fear articulating the spiritual and ethereal like Brian Doyle or C.S. Lewis, and because of that, her writing achieves revelation and transcendence. John Tagata said, "The essay is the equivalent of a mind in rumination," and I'm convinced that if Sarah Jane were to read her essays or let us roam in her mind for the next few hours, we would be captivated and awakened to several things we have lost through the years. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Jane Myers.
Thanks, Meg. I should probably mention that I was the only kindergartner to enter that writing contest, so of course I won. All right, this first piece is written in the form of a letter. I'm surprisingly nervous, so you should all just pray for me. Okay, to the boy in my second grade class. I know you were just joking back in our classroom about our fruit roll-ups burning, where we left them in the gymnasium lunchroom because of the fire drill. I know you probably weren't thinking about your father at all when you said the joke, even though it was your first day back at school. After everything happened, were you thinking of your father when you joked about our fruit roll-ups burning? I couldn't think of anything else after our teacher told us the horribleness of a father burning, the horribleness of a father sleeping and burning. I know I should have thought before, but I didn't. Our fruit roll-ups won't burn because it's just a drill. But your dad did. He burned. I know I shouldn't have said it. Your father burning didn't seem real to me. I couldn't believe that could happen. I said it as a question. He burned? I wonder if it seemed real to you. I wonder if you hated me for making it more real with my words. Those words have burned me for years with guilt. I wish I would have known not to say them. I know we haven't had a class or even the same city in common since second grade before you moved away. That year in elementary school was the last time I saw you. I'm writing you this now, even though I don't know where to send it. When our teacher told us you weren't in school because your father died in a fire in his trailer, asleep and alone, I know she told us so we would be extra nice. I didn't realize that extra nice meant I shouldn't remind you of your father burning. I wasn't extra nice. I know I deserved it when you kicked me in the shins. I don't blame you at all for yelling, "Shut up." I don't blame you for running out of the room. And when the silent watchers finally spoke up and said you're in so much trouble, I knew they were right. I stared down at the green, hard-packed carpet of the classroom, and my words burned in my throat. And when our tall, gray-haired teacher came back after lunch and took you and I into the yellow linoleum hallway and looked at us with tears leaking in the corners of her eyes, I knew I deserved to be punished. I knew she was right when she told me with a hitch in her voice how horribly I needed to apologize. Do you remember that? I stood across from you and our crying teacher, and I could think only of the burning. Flames and smoke filled my mind. I wanted, frantically, to figure out how it could be real that your father burned. Was mine going to burn too? Would everyone's? I somehow managed an "I'm sorry," and you just looked at me. Then you walked back into our classroom and the metal door clanged behind you. I couldn't look at our teacher alone in the hallway with me. I looked at the cracked yellow linoleum under my feet, and everywhere inside I burned. We never said a thing to each other again. Sometimes you walked past my desk in your old white tennis shoes to the pencil sharpener, and I opened my mouth to try, but I always felt a rock at the back of my throat, and you walked past before I could ever swallow it and speak. Then you moved away to another city. The words I shouldn't have said and the words that I should have said that day in the hallway drift back to me now like smoke down an empty strip of linoleum. I am not writing this letter to try and apologize. I still don't know how. There are rocks in my throat. In my second grade mind, all the fathers are sleeping and burning, and I can't understand. In my second grade mind, you are still walking endlessly past my desk to the pencil sharpener in your old white tennis shoes. I hope my words don't still burn in your memory, too. I hope you have found a way to forgive me. I hope, because I think this letter is my way of trying to forgive myself. All right. On a slightly happier note, this next one is called The Shower and the Spider. As some of you probably know, I had a baby about 6 weeks ago, but this next essay was written while I was still pregnant. The Shower and the Spider. About 2 years ago, I hung a shower curtain in the hall bathroom of our small apartment. It has 2 layers. The inside sheet is clear. The outside sheet is pale grayish-green fabric with a tiny, indiscernible pattern etched over the entire expanse. The whole affair is nothing elaborate or spectacular. With the onset of pregnancy, much of what I once considered perfectly adequate and comfortable, even desirable, has become distinctly not so anymore. Our once soft bed now feels lumpy and irritable. Music I once enjoyed now sounds grating and inane. I have come to prefer only the sound of silence, or the classical composers from Bach and Mozart to Chopin and on to the Russian geniuses like Shostakovich, but no further forward. This has nothing to do with those theories about how listening to classical music while you're pregnant will make your child more intelligent. I suspect this shift in my musical taste has everything to do with my own irrational, hormone-affected irritability. Even the air I once breathed without a thought has become laced with new smells I detest. I can no longer stand to be in a room without an open window. Luckily, our small apartment has the luxury of being at the end of the building and has windows everywhere except the master bathroom. This is why I have unapologetically appropriated the small hall bathroom. No one else is allowed to use it. I have even considered putting up a sign on the door, occupied for the duration, or reserved indefinitely, or keep out, or out of order, or I throw up in here often. All of these changes led to my encounter with the spider. And this incident with a small, 8-legged creature, more than anything else, has convinced me that my life is radically shifting, far beyond my continually protruding belly and my newfound irritability towards such innocent things as air and music. The window in the hall bathroom is inside the shower. This is probably how the spider got in. In the lower left corner of the window is printed the date February 1993. I had a strange moment while showering as I realized that the window was made and possibly installed when I was 4 years old. At that age, I was living in a city far away in another small apartment with my young siblings and my parents. As a 4-year-old, our small apartment in San Diego, California, seemed a large, wonderful mansion. I was afraid of spiders then, but I can remember having few other fears at that age. My time as a 4-year-old is vague and scattered and twinkling, twirling in our tiny front room in light pink ballet shoes, listening to Sergei Prokofiev's Opus 67, Peter and the Wolf, on the record player, trying to follow along and distinguish which instruments represented which animals. Or the time I decided to leave our fenced-in tiny concrete backyard. Turning down this street and that street, I followed a scraggly bearded man picking up cans from the gutter and placing them into a big black bag he carried over his shoulder. I picked up a red can of my own to give him and was scooped up from behind by my mother and carried back through the streets. She sat me down in a wooden kitchen chair and scolded. I was confused by her fear. You cannot go wandering away by yourself. You could get hurt or taken away. You could be killed. I considered briefly and then responded rationally. It's okay, Mom. I can run very fast. She just looked at me for a moment and then began a spectacular display of comebacks I could not hope to keep up with. Someone could run faster. It's okay, Mom. I can hit very hard. Well, what if they could hit harder? I can bite. Well, what if they could bite harder? And so, just like that, I learned that people could be something to fear and could be something that potentially required hitting and biting and running. It was not a comfortable revelation then, and still is not a fear I enjoy as I walk down streets alone or to my car in a dark parking lot. But I know it is a fear and awareness that probably keeps me safer. It seemed to me as a 4-year-old in the conversation with my mother that some things, like hitting and biting strangers, must be eventually unavoidable, because I still wanted to give that red can to the man with the scraggly beard. Even if it was inevitable that I would be hurt, I just wanted to hand it over. I still remember my serious-faced mother looking anxiously into my face as I planned, in my mind, the next time I would escape. I would go find that man and give him my can. Remembering my own 4-year-old thoughts terrifies me now as I consider the daunting task of teaching my own small child how to know what to be afraid of and how to be safe. Some harm in this world seems inevitable, which is why I shouldn't have been shocked the day a spider showed up in my shower, but I was. I was in the shower of our hall bathroom, window cracked, when I suddenly caught sight of the spider. It was hanging quietly between the outer pale green of the shower curtain and the inward plastic barrier. It had a golden belly and tiny pale yellow legs. I immediately leapt backward, nearly slipping in the soapy water, and squished myself as much as I could into the furthest corner. Even as I began considering the quickest, most humane ways to eliminate this imminent threat, blasting it with the water, smashing it in between the shower curtains, calling my husband to come get rid of it, I found myself also beginning to consider other strange things. Almost against my will, I began to creep slowly from my safe corner to try and get a better look. I stared at its round golden belly and began to wonder whether there might not be tiny baby spider eggs forming inside. I looked at the thin, pale yellow legs of the spider as it hung motionless in front of me, and I wondered if its legs felt as tired and shaky as mine. I wondered if it might not be a she. Perhaps she was preparing to be a mother as well, and trying to adjust to new smells and uncomfortable spaces. She had made it inside my shower and found a place near water and an exit to the outside, but safe from both. Perhaps the roaring waterfall streaming so close to her resting place was her comforting sound. In a matter of moments, I felt a kinship with this spider, although I knew that I had no way of knowing if my speculations about her pending motherhood were true. I opened negotiations anyway. I informed her that she was welcome to stay as long as she didn't bite me or my child. I promised I wouldn't hit her or chase her away because I knew what it was like to be tired and uncomfortable and confused about what to be afraid of. I assured her that she probably should try to avoid this close proximity to most humans, but that I could be an exception. I told her I knew how it felt to find yourself cradling a new life inside of you and to wonder how you will possibly protect them and teach them all they will need to know once they emerge into this huge, loud, strange-smelling, wonderful, terrifying world. Sure enough, one day I found that a small silken sack was carefully hung inside the web. I chose to believe it contained little infant golden spiders sleeping as they formed, and not just a particularly juicy fly that she was saving for later. I congratulated her on her growing family, and then my husband and I went out of town for a few weeks. When we returned, the pale yellow spider was gone. The remnants of her web hung wispy and abandoned. I am now, as I write this, only a few weeks away from the birth of my own new daughter, but I still sometimes think about that mother spider who kept me company through many uncomfortable days and weeks. I sometimes wonder where she is and how her children, if she indeed had them, are adjusting to the many complexities of life with sight and sound and hunger and fear. I wonder whether any of them ever escape their wooden gates and wander down strange streets, picking up red cans in 2 of their 8 tiny yellow legs, and follow scraggly, bearded strangers. I try not to think about the fact that some of my spider friends' children most likely failed to survive infancy. I fear what life and its sights, sounds, hungers, and fears might do to my own daughter. I want her to be safe. I want her to know not to run down strange streets picking up red cans. I am tempted to wish I could wrap her in a soft silk web and guard her protectively forever. But remembering my own 4-year-old yearnings for exploration tells me that my daughter would most likely be miserable confined in a silken web. If she wants to smash spiders on sight, I will probably encourage it. But I suspect I will also sometimes remember that strange moment between myself and the time I met the golden spider hanging in my shower. I don't think I will ever quite shake the strange feeling when I decided she could stay. When I looked at that spider's 8 tiny, pale yellow legs and wondered if they felt as tired and shaky as mine. Thank you.